just robot and just read it like this. So you're welcome for that. Also, if you were here last year, my sister was here. If you remember her, I don't know how many of you were here last year, but she's better at this than me. So don't get your hopes up too much, because I'm not a speaker. I am a mom. I am a somewhat failed farmer. God gave me a farm, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? And so, excuse me, I just sniffled in the microphone. Great. Katie made me cry. It's her fault. Okay, so, and my whole family they're all speakers, and they're all teachers and politicians, and anyway, they're better at this than me, and it's kind of ironic because I'm the one with a broadcasting degree, so that's not fair. But even though Katie said all those wonderful things about me, I'm a little rough around the edges. So if I get a little, just bear with me. And also I do this as a coping mechanism. So, but like I said, I'm a mom. I'm a homeschool mom, which is real surprising. So that's fun. And I'm kind of a scout troop leader, but it's not the Scouts. It's called American Heritage Girls. And it is a wonderful ministry that's nationwide, but I'm not going to get too far into that. But I am going to share some things that we have talked about over the last year. But anyway, when Beth asked me to speak, she said, what can I put next to your name? And I sat there for a second and I thought, well, I've done a lot of really cool stuff, but honestly, that's not who I am anymore. And so while some people would say, oh, don't just put mom, or don't just put this, or just put that, honestly, that's who I am now, so that's what we put on it. And honestly, and I'll say that word a lot, but in the past 2 months, my family has really stepped into not caring about all of these things that sound really, really cool. And when she asked me to speak on intimacy, I thought, I don't know that I'm really the best one for that subject. But it was before this summer, I think it was about maybe 2 months ago. And in the past 2 months, my family has shed some things that weren't for us. And so now it makes sense as to why I'm speaking on this subject, because for the first time in a long time, my family is being completely obedient in what God wants us to do. As farmers, which doesn't make sense because we don't know a thing about cattle. But we're like in charge of the cattlemen, so I don't know. And so we're figuring it out. And I don't know anything. I'm not Katie. I'm not a teacher. I'm not my sisters who are both teachers. I'm not my mom who's a teacher. But God told me to homeschool, so here we are. And no, it doesn't make sense to be a farmer when you've never done it. It doesn't. I just sniffled into the microphone again. But no, it doesn't make sense for me to be a homeschool mom. It does make sense to me for me to be a scout troop leader, which, if you know me, it does make total sense. But because I'm always outside. But just because just because it doesn't make sense doesn't mean it's not for you. So in the past 2 months, we've really stepped into what God has for us, and so that's why I want to talk about obedience tonight. And like I said, in the past, God has given me this sermon. He gave it to me 7 years ago when we moved back home, because my family, me and Chase, were kind of disobedient, and we stayed in Lexington for a while doing a real cool job that I thought, oh, I sound really cool. But it wasn't for me forever. God did give me that job, and I thought, oh, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's just not how it was. And then we moved, I'll get to this in a minute, but we moved to the middle of the Red River Gorge. That was a mistake. And so we had to sell that farm 2 years after we moved there, which doesn't make any sense because you can't really get a profit off of a farm that you just bought. But God told us to go back home. And so we did. And so when we went back there, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but we went back to our farm, to the farm that we have now. And when I got there, I remembered God gave this farm to me in a vision in college, and I had forgotten about it. And don't we do that sometimes? We do that a lot. I know I do. And so I had been running from these things, and I forgot that God had told me and had showed me this farm, this beautiful farm that overlooks all these mountains. I know y'all ain't Facebook friends with me, but it's it's absolutely gorgeous. And in the middle of Goldbug, which if I had kept with that cool job in Lexington, I would have never lived there. But anyway, we went and looked at it, and I said, this is, I remember, I had forgotten. And we do that sometimes, don't we? And so tonight I'm going to talk about obedience, and I've gotten a little ahead of myself, so I might repeat myself, which just look over me. I might do that. So anyway, I'm going to go back to my spot that I got ahead of myself. But, and while there are many ways to be intimate and know God fully, as like fasting, of course praying, which y'all seem like pretty mature Christians, so you know all this, right? But fasting, praying, confessing, living humbly, knowing that you're going to mess up, reading your Bible, going to church, small groups, getting rid of sin. I do want to talk about obedience because of what I'm sitting in right now, what my family is sitting in right now. And like I said 2 months ago when Beth asked me to preach about this, I was like, I don't know. But in the past 2 months, I've watched my family get closer to Him and doing things that may not seem logical, but that's what He has for us. And so through doing all of that, we're much more closer to God as a family. And it's just been incredibly beautiful. So I might tell you about all the wrong turns that I've made in my life. And Katie was there for most of it. But anyway, I think the good news is that God blesses those that are humbly trying, even though we mess up a lot. So anyway, so going back to that farm, and I'm going to switch timelines a lot, so try to stick with me. Hopefully God will translate my mumbling into y'all understanding. But my job on the farm, because I don't know nothing about cattle, honestly, neither does my husband, but and not really horses either, but we have those. But my job on the farm is to take care of the fruit trees. I also take care of the basically the ecosystem and the pollinators, but my biggest job is to take care of the fruit trees. And each tree gets treated differently, so it makes it kind of difficult. But when we got to the farm 7 years ago, it was what we call down here, it was all growed up. It was just all growed up. And honestly, the grapes were as high as the dogwoods, and I looked at them and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And there's a lot of fruit. We got elderberries, blueberries, grapes, and lots of apple trees. And we have peaches, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about. And but anyway, so we got there and I got really excited about the peaches because I thought, ooh, ain't nobody got peaches in Wheatley County, so I might be able to make a little profit off of this. And again, I don't know. So I researched about all of these fruit trees and what the heck do I do with them. And I knew that fruit was biblical, but I don't think I truly knew. I didn't actually live it and know just how hard it is to keep up with them. But I found out that peach trees are super difficult to grow in southern Kentucky. Yeah. So, of course, I looked at that and I said, ooh, challenge accepted. And, so I thought, well, I got these, so I'm going to take care of them and be a good steward of what God's given me. But, anyway, so I got to looking at it and it's so incredibly biblical with all the pruning and all of the everything about them, and just the timing and everything was just so biblical. And so God started giving me piece by piece, year by year, this sermon, honestly. so this is, like I said, this is the first time I'm sharing it. So I hope I say it correctly, which is why I'm reading my phone. But so yeah, this is 7 years in the making. But I'm gonna go back to my troop for a second. Last year, I don't know how to say this, but I became the troop leader kind of out of emergency, and I had to suddenly plan the entire year, and like as it was starting. And so we went out to the church and we foraged blackberries, and God told me to preach a sermon surrounding Psalm 139, and which is kind of like a life sermon for me. And I'll paraphrase. Of course, y'all can open your Bible and read it. Thank you very much. And but I will paraphrase. Oh Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You chart the path ahead of me and tell me where to stop and rest. You both precede me and follow me and place your hand of blessing on my head. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit them together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so fearfully and wonderfully. Now the whole entire chapter is kind of like my life chapter. It's important to me because I even have a website called that, which I'm not here to plug that, but anyway, so it makes me feel better because I know that when I mess up, he can fix it. And if I just continually seek his face, he'll fix my mess. And that makes me feel better because I know that I'm not perfect. I know I'm going to mess up. And that humility, I think, just continually seeking him, even though I know that I'm going to mess up, brings that intimacy even more. Because, like I said, there's good news for those that try hard. And so we planned last year's calendar after I was suddenly put in charge of the troop. It was really stressful. And we had that meeting, and we foraged for blackberries. And I not only preached about God makes you perfectly, you are beautiful, and everything that Psalm 139 said about us, that also goes for creation. And then we picked blackberries, and I told them what to eat, and please don't poison yourself. Please, don't do that. So, but not long after that, we found out that Psalm 139 was the entire theme of AHG for that year, which is why I'm wearing this shirt, this woven shirt with a sheep on it. So we did a lot of things surrounding that, but the best meeting that we had was called the Identity Badge. But it wasn't just about identity, it was about seeking the Lord and being intimate with him, and therefore finding your true identity. And so we had the best meeting that we ever had in February when we did that badge. And we made little bracelets, which I don't have one because my daughter lost it. But we had the best meeting that we ever had, and we put these little pearls and made a bracelet, and they all stood for different things. I am unique, Psalms 139. I'm adopted by the King, Ephesians 1:5. I have a purpose, Jeremiah 29:11. And so there's just different things like that, and made really cute bracelets. And anyway, it was really beautiful, and my phone went off. Hold on. And so I took the big girls that was for all the troop, and I took the big girls to another classroom, and God gave me a sermon surrounding being intimate with God, and therefore knowing him and knowing yourself. And so, and we learned that when we're closer to God and what he has for us, instead of what the world has for us, we're further from the world, and because we're further from the world, we're further from our flesh and our worldly wants, which we all know, right? But it's kind of hard to live that out, at least for me. And it's been a struggle my whole life. I've run from different things that God told me to do. I told him I didn't want to be a mom. I told him I wanted to stay in my cool job, and didn't want to be a farmer. I wanted to live in the city and make money and be cool, but that's not what he had for me. And I'm really thankful for that, because now what I'm living in now is like my whole life is worship, and my whole entire every step that I take, and with my kids and homeschooling and with my troop and everything that doesn't sound cool, it's like my life is just pure worship all the time. And it's really, really so beautiful, and I'm so thankful that even though I messed up, he fixed it. And so the night of the meeting we made the bracelets, and I took the big girls to another room. And I'm sorry if this gets really long. Just tell me to shut up. So, I wrote different things on the board, and they started out easy. So words like, and this is for teenagers, so translate it for yourself as adults. But, and I'll get to my life as an adult kind of later. But I wrote words on the board like fashion and makeup and boyfriends and even friends. And I said, these are great things. These are all great things. But if you become obsessed with that, and I even wrote sports teams, and I wrote different grades and things like that. So these are all great things. But they can distract you. And honestly, anything can distract you if you let it. And so I started going through it, and I'm not going to take up too much time, but I went through things like boyfriends. And I said, as a high schooler in your age, I used to change my identity based on my boyfriend, which in high school, I had some really, really good friends, one of them named Katie Skeen, that took me to the side and said, hey, you change your personality based on your boyfriend, which was 25 years ago, and that makes me want to throw up. I don't like that. That's really gross. So, it's super gross. I don't like it. So, anyway, and I started going through, and I said, if your friends don't point you to God, then you might have to be lonely for a minute and pray that God will provide. Pray to the God that, pray to Jireh. Pray to Elohim. And know exactly who he is, because he will provide. And he is your creator. And so he's not going to let you be lonely for too long. He will provide better friends. He will provide a better boyfriend that shows you to the Lord. And so, but anything can distract us, right? If we let it. So, and I told him, I said, isn't that kind of what happened in the garden though? It starts out super, super innocent. But then it distracts you just a teensy bit, and then a little bit more, and then if you let it, it just unravels. And then you start to question stuff, and that's when it gets out of control. And so, imagine yourself back at my farm again. We're not at the church looking at the words on the board anymore that I keep erasing and they keep gasping every time because they can't live without those things. And so, we're back at the farm that God showed me in college, that God ordained for us to live there, that God gave us, that I have to be a good steward of, even though I don't know nothing about cattle, I don't know nothing about peaches, I don't know nothing about any of it, honestly. But we're back at the farm, and it's a little growed up. And so, and I'm going to speak in metaphors, and I think y'all are mature Christians. So, just try to understand what I mean. But anyway, I looked into peaches, and I thought this is going to be real, and I knew this was going to be really hard. And a lot of the reason why peaches are so hard in Kentucky is because of the climate, and specifically because of the blackberry winter. Dun, dun, dun. And then sometimes we even have breeches winter, which is fun, at the end of May, which if you get a breeches winter, just forget about it. You're done. And so you just have to admit defeat, and Anyway, but the point is God's timing. And the peach tree, what happens to the peach tree is that it gets really excited at the first sign of spring, and it says, oh, it's time for spring. It's spring in Georgia. And it's not time. And it blossoms. And it blossoms way too early. And so the first year, I was given really bad advice, and I was told to go ahead and prune it. And I pruned the trees, and then the blackberry winter hit, of course, and it about froze my peaches to death, and about killed my trees. And I prayed, and I said, but Lord, I prayed, and I hoped, and I trusted, and I believed, but I didn't wait. And so about killed my trees. And we hear all the time, and in his perfect time, we see his plan and his faithful plan unfold. In Ecclesiastes, we hear there's a season, time to every purpose under heaven. And if I had listened And you think I would because Ecclesiastes is my favorite book. But I didn't. I didn't chill out and about killed my trees. And so let's switch timelines again. And imagine we're at church with the big girls and we're talking about our true identity in Jesus and being intimate with Him and knowing Him, thus knowing our identity. But I started out easy, and like I told you, I said you can't let this stuff distract you. And there is a time for these things. But maybe it's not now. And you have to know when the time is. Maybe that guy's going to come back. Maybe he won't. Because I'll tell you, me and Chase broke up about 12 times. But we ended up getting married. But maybe it's just not the time. But and anyway, and that pertains to our life, obviously. But and I had heard the calling to homeschool for forever. And I just knew it wasn't the time. And so I waited. And I'll get to that in a second. But and God ordained it. I mean, hallelujah. But and you get rid of these things and I erase everything one by one, and it's a sacrifice, and it is hard, and it is lonely sometimes, but you have to trust that He will provide, and it will all cause intimacy with Him, even in the hard time, even in while you're waiting, even in all of it. And so in my adult life, I want to use the example of being a farmer, like I said. And I wanted to do all these things, and I thought, I'm going to make a profit on these peaches, and I'm going to make it a ministry immediately, and I'm going to have a harvest for the first year. But I kept making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I even got goats, which is always a mistake. So if you're taking notes, write it down. Goats are a mistake, always. But see, you can receive a calling or a purpose that brings you closer to Him, but first you have to work. And I needed to work the farm first because it hadn't been working in a while. And so you can wait and you think, it's time. It's time for this and it's time for that. But if God says it's not, then it's not. And I've been reading Isaiah lately, and I read recently, I'm pretty sure it was Isaiah 6. I'm going off my memory. Isaiah 6, there's a lot of woes. And I was thinking the other day, when I was thinking about the sermon, I thought, usually when there is a woe, where there is a go, there is a woe. And I didn't do that part. And often we don't. And I think there's a woe as in anguish, W-O-E, as in sanctification, as in sacrifice, but there's also a woe as in W-H-O-H, I think I spelled that right, as in wait. And so I said all of this, I said I've made mistakes, and so I erased the word. Back with the girls, I erased the word farmer. And so going back to the peach trees, sorry I keep bouncing around, but now we know that we can't prune the trees before blackberry winter, and we have to wait for His timing to prune, and we have to know what to prune. And once I learned that, I realized to prune in May, and so you have to wait for all those fall springs. You think, it's getting hot again, I can prune, and it's just not time. And so also in late May, the leaves start to show, and you may even have some blossoms, and you may even have little nubbins of fruit. And you think, it's finally time. It's finally time. Well, but you see all these things, and you see the fruit, and you say, I can't cut that off. That's fruit. I can't cut off that fruit. I've been waiting all this time, and now I got to cut it off. And anyway, and if you don't, with peach trees, that in late May, the growth of the tree goes straight up. And what happens when you don't prune it is that growth that goes straight up, it snaps at the first breeze. And if you don't prune it, it won't grow straight out and have strong branches. And so that's where it starts to get kind of hard. And so in my life, I've had many things that grew and even grew my faith. I had a great job lined up at Cumberland College, and I knew what I was doing. I knew everybody there. And I was in the interview, and they asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I stopped for a second. And I can't explain it, but I'd never been there before, but the live booth of WKYT flashed into my eyes, or into whatever, into my head. And I thought, and I'd had a broadcasting degree, and I'd never been there. And so I told him, I threw the interview, and I said, I see myself at WKYT. And I don't know how to explain that, and I know that I'm not going to get the job. But if I hadn't have said that, I would have gotten an easy job. What was, well, not easy, but a lot easier than what I ended up doing. And I would have never grown out. I would have gone straight up, and I would have buckled at the first freeze. And let alone when the fruit gets really, really big in June, in July, I would have never been able to hold that. Never. So, about 6 years after that, well, longer than that, because I went to the paper, and then I went to WYNT, and then I went to WKYT, and it was really, really hard. And I mean talking, I'm hard going to, it was awful, to be honest. We had bullets flying by my head all the time, and driving into tornadoes, and and now I'm just kind of fearless. And I would have never been that way if I wouldn't have listened. And so, but anyway, but God told me to leave, and He told me it was time to start a family, and He told me it was time to have a farm, and I said that don't make no sense. And so I left. I left that job that I loved, and I left it in the middle of. I was doing great with it, but it was time to go. And so, anyway. And so sometimes I think, well, what was the reason for that job? Why did I do that? And so sometimes now I'll try to fulfill whatever and make it make sense. And to be honest, start ministries that revolve around broadcasting or making videos or whatever, just to make that job make sense. But that's not my job, that's His job. And so in this month, and I'm going to kind of wrap it up with this, but this month, or this summer, I gave up that ministry. And I said, I don't think it's time for me to do that anymore. And it was really, really hard, because I loved it. And so, back at the church with the girls, I told them that, I said, I think it's time to focus on y'all. And I think it's time to focus on my family, and I think it's time to do all these things that God has told me to do. And I started crying, because I didn't want to give it up, and it's still hard. But since I have, the fruit has just grown and grown and grown and grown. And it's like every day is a day of worship. And I'm so more intimately, I know Him so much more intimately, because I'm doing exactly what He's wanted me to do, what He created me to do this whole time. So, anyway, then I got to talking about the peach trees with them again, and I said, actually this time of year, the leaves start to fall off of the tree, and you start to be able, and they become exposed, and you start to see the dead limbs. And I might get emotional, but I told the girls, I said, and this might be the hardest part, because you kind of want to hold on to that stuff. And just to be personal, the girls had a really hard year, and one of them had been through a tremendous tragedy. That's probably one of the worst things that has ever happened in Corbin. And one of them had parents in jail, and two sisters had lost their house, everything, in a fire like a month before that. And then one of them, their family uprooted their whole life from Colorado to move to Kentucky, and so they had a lot of stuff. And so I said, I know it's hard, and I know, but I know you're allowed to be sad, but you can't carry around dead limbs. And so I erased the word tragedy. But so anyway, at this time of the year, you have to prune the trees for a third time, and it is really hard, but it's easier because you've been doing it all year long. And so you don't have stuff falling on you all the time, and anyway, it's a lot easier just because you've done the work. So, and then we talked about with the dead branches, we talked about sin and getting rid of sin and stepping away from that. And I erased the word sin, and I erased the word tragedy, and I erased a lot of words. But I talked about the season that we were in at the time, which was February, and I said, you know, it's winter. And what the trees do in the winter is they rest, and they take a Sabbath. And you have to be able to do that. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest." And my best friend in Ohio, she just went on a Sabbath for 6 weeks. And they have a church in Cincinnati that's huge. And so it doesn't really make sense to take 6 weeks off because he's got work to do. They've both got work to do, but they took a Sabbath. And she said through that time, we learned to get rid of some ministries. I think she got rid of the greeters ministry, and she started focusing on her troop, and she started focusing on her family. And it's just, she said, God just really revealed a lot to us, and more sermons and more things that we needed to do, and it was just beautiful. So anyway, I'm going to try to cut some stuff out and wrap this up because it's been way too long. But I think maybe we just get distracted and we don't quite realize just how deep and intimate we can get with our Lord, and I think the world just distracts us, and we don't mean to let it, but it does. But yes, and God does want to reward us and show us the fruit for our obedience, but don't, that's not the reward God is. The relationship is the reward. It's not what he blesses you with, so don't get that mistaken. So you might ask, how do you know what to do and what to prune and the last thing I'm going to leave you with is I got some really, really good advice whenever I felt called to homeschool, which was in 2020. And I went to my friend Holly Howard, who was homeschooling, and she said, you need to pray for your family to have that motivation. Don't push them. And then you need to pray for your motivation to leave. And if your motivation doesn't leave, and if their motivation comes, it's for you. And so that's probably the best advice I've ever given, which seems really obvious, but I hadn't thought of that. And so it took 4 years, and I think it's so beautiful because Rosie started saying, I think I want to be homeschooled because we have girls that are homeschooled during our trip. And so her motivation came in, and God started giving Chase employees that were homeschooled, and he kept saying, these guys act like they're 38 and they're 24, and they're not weird. And so, yeah, fancy that. And so anyway, so their motivation came. And so I just want to end with, once you learn to step out in faith, it gets easier and easier and easier, and you get closer and closer and closer, and the world gets quieter and quieter and quieter, just through being obedient a little bit at a time. And you don't have to do it perfectly every time, but he will reward it, and he is the reward. So I'll end